Hi, Helen. Thank you so much for
Hello.
being with us. I wanted to just briefly ask you to introduce yourself in your own words, because even though I've been following your work for years, I think I've only scratched the surface of understanding what you've done for the
Okay. Well,
community.
I'm a pediatrician who was on the faculty at Harvard in the
Mhm.
cystic fibrosis clinic. So I started a CF clinic in Australia, the first one, which is doing very well. I became involved in the nuclear issue when I was about 17. I read a book called On the Beach by Neville Shute, an Australian author, um, about a nuclear war that occurred by accident in the Northern Hemisphere. And gradually the radiation came down to Melbourne, where I lived, and everyone died. And that marked my soul.
Mhm.
So I was never the same again. I was always aware of the threat of nuclear war. Um, but I didn't really get involved until the French started testing weapons in the South Pacific, and we got a high fallout in Adelaide, where I lived. And I wrote a letter to the paper that children could get leukemia from the radiation in the water and the milk and the food. After the letter was published, I was asked to go on TV. And to cut a long story short, as I educated more and more people via TV and radio, the Australian people rose up en masse and demanded they hate the French. They think they're arrogant. I've got a French son-in-law who's a count. He is arrogant. And after 9 months of spontaneous, huge marches in city streets, the government was forced to take France to the International Court of Justice, and she was forced to test underground. So out of sight is out of mind. It wasn't good, but it was better. And I went to France to meet with the people in France who are testing the bombs, and they told us their bombs were perfectly safe. So I was with the Deputy Prime Minister. He said, well, why don't you test them in the Mediterranean? And they had a terrible panic attack and said, there are too many people. Yeah, so that was pretty educational for me. Anyway, the Prime Minister then took France to the International Court of Justice, and she was forced to test underground, as I've said before. So I saw what Jefferson said, President Jefferson: an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion if you teach people. And so I've always seen the public as my patients. So
Mhm.
when I talk to huge crowds, I talk to them as a doctor, explaining their disease, making them feel very bad about it, and helping them to work out what to do about it. So I actually am a doctor practicing global preventive medicine.
Mhm.
So what happened next? I found out Australia wanted to mine uranium. I knew nothing about it. I went to the library and got a book called Poison Power by two wonderful men, Goffman and Tamplin, who were asked by the Atomic Energy Commission to write about dangers of nuclear power, and I had no idea. So then I knew a union worker, and he said, let's write to all the unions in Australia and ask if you can come and talk to them. And I did. I travelled all around Australia before they went to work, at 6 o'clock in the morning, these hard-bitten men.
Mhm.
And eventually the Australian Council of Trade Unions, and we were very much unionised at that time, passed a resolution to neither mine, transport nor export uranium. So that was big. Then I went to America, and I gave a talk at a neighbourhood gathering about the dangers of nuclear power in West Newton in Boston.
Mhm.
And I was asked to write a book about it. And I did. It's called Nuclear Madness. That came out just before 3 Mile Island melted down. So I was all over the television talking about the dangers of nuclear power on 3 Mile Island. Then I went on a huge rally in Washington, D.C. with Dr. Spock, the baby doctor, and talked to, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people about the dangers of 3 Mile Island and meltdowns and stuff. Then what happened? I was working at Harvard Medical School, and yeah, I a young doctor came to see me about, there was a referendum in Cambridge, Massachusetts, against all things nuclear, and Harvard and MIT are in Cambridge, and they do a lot of nuclear work. In fact, there's a small reactor at MIT. And as we talked, I turned to him and I said, you know, Ira, this is a medical issue. So we found there was an ancient organization called Physicians for Social Responsibility that started in the 60s, and it died, but it was still registered in the state of Massachusetts. So we took the name, and I started doing grand runs at hospitals to doctors once a week, talking and educating them about the dangers of nuclear power and nuclear war. And through that process, we recruited 23,000 doctors. I was heavily involved in the nuclear freeze movement, which Randy Forsberg started. And I got to be speaking, and then an agent in Hollywood said she'd work with me, and she got me in Vogue, Lifetime, Family Circle, Ladies' Home Journal, on television, Phil Donahue, Merv Griffin, all over the place. So through those avenues, I was able to educate the American people about the dangers of nuclear power, and mostly nuclear war. And then a huge movement grew. And then I traveled all around the world, starting similar medical organizations in Japan and all over Europe, and in England, Scotland, Ireland, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
And Gorbachev heard us talk, and I met with Reagan for an hour in the White House by myself with his daughter, Patty, trying to teach him about nuclear war, and he quoted me from the Reader's Digest. I came out saying I thought clinically he had impending Alzheimer's, which he did. Anyway, the result of all this massive movement around the world against nuclear war, Reagan and Gorbachev, and a film was made called The Day After, as a result of our work about a bomb dropping on a Midwestern city. Reagan watched it, and it really blew his mind apart. And then he ended up meeting with Gorbachev in Reykjavik in Iceland in 1998, and they almost agreed over a weekend to abolish nuclear weapons. But Reagan was hung up on Star Wars, and so it ended, and they didn't get to that. But it helped to bring an end to the Cold War. After that, I think after that, I'd come back to Australia. I wanted to be with the kids who were at university here, and they'd all left Boston.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you about that moment that you just described?
Which?
So you were basically active at the highest peak of the anti-nuclear movement in the US. And obviously, since then, it's really, died down. I wanted to ask you there were obviously so many successes, the end of nuclear testing and the decrease in nuclear arsenals, but also such a failure in public understanding right now, where most people really don't know.
Because no one's out there educating. It's Jefferson who said an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. No one's teaching people about the medical effects of nuclear war, and it'll be the end of all of us.
What do you think?
No one doing it.
We need to bring back a movement.
Exactly.
And how does a present movement need to be different than what we had in the 70s and the 80s to make it
well, you need to be able to get charismatic leaders, and preferably physicians, on all the media around America in particular, talking about the medical effects of nuclear war. That's what I did, and that's how, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Sixpack sitting back watching television one night hear me doing that, and they thought, oh my God, so everyone got educated about the profound dangers. And when the Day After film played, huge majority of Americans watched it. There were psychologists in every town counseling people about their fears and everything. It was profound.
Do you believe there are entrenched interests in the media, let's speak about at least American media, that are preventing these messages from getting out, or are there just not enough leaders
Oh, I
wishing?
think both. Yes, I think both. But, you know, if you had a really good Hollywood publicist who, you know, she worked for Tom Cruise and
Mhm.
Lily Tomlin and Sally Field, and she had put me on television with Sally Field. They didn't want a boring old woman doctor from Australia talking about the medical effects of nuclear power and nuclear war. It would turn off the audience, but they wanted to see Sally Field or Lily Tomlin, you know. So she was very clever deploying her people with me. And that needs to happen again. But, you know, and I was very close to Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House in Congress. I was very close to Teddy Kennedy. I was very close to a lot of the very top people all over the world. I held conferences and symposia on the medical effects of nuclear war. And a book came from that called Sleepwalking to Armageddon.
Mhm.
And I had other symposia on the dangers of nuclear power, especially after Fukushima.
Right.
Crisis Without End, the book was called. If you go to my webpage, have you been there?
Yes.
Yeah, well, you can see all the videos and the books I've written and all that stuff, you know. So it's all there.
Yeah. It's just for me, especially my age group, we're pretty plugged in with, climate change. And
What should be.
we should be, but there's such a mass movement of young people for this, and yet these issues are so tied, and nuclear war, nuclear energy is nowhere to be seen in that debate. If anything, the climate change debate often accelerates the
I know. So
nuclear.
what do you want to do about that?
That's what I'm here to ask you, Helen. Like, how can we not repeat, I guess, the mistakes of the past in terms of
Hey, get my film If You Love This Planet, which is on my website, half an hour long, Academy Award, describing the medical effects of nuclear war. Watch it, and you get it all over social media, all over the climate activists, everywhere. You could do that single-handedly because social media is so ubiquitous now.
right?
TikTok, I mean, you can do everything with it. And get everyone to watch that film, and it'll make them cry and scared shitless.
Is there anything
I'll
about,
help you.
I mean, I would love to. I think that and it's 30 minutes is so digestible as well.
So digestible, yep.
Is there anything about the present geopolitical situation that makes you, I heard you speak a year ago and you said you were the most concerned you've ever been.
We're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been, with Putin now threatening to use nuclear weapons, with NATO, which is really America, threatening Putin. You know, there are mad right-wing idiots in this administration, and Biden's a dope. And he's a genocidal maniac, actually, what he's doing in Israel. But there's a woman called Victoria Newland in the State Department who kind of runs it. And she initiated the Maiden Square massacre in the Ukraine, look that up, and deposed a democratically elected prime minister. And that started the whole Ukrainian terrible business. And they're basically taking on Russia through the Ukraine. And now Poland and France are getting into the act. And if these countries through NATO start bombing Russia, which they're starting to do, I mean, the Ukrainian president is targeting things in Russia. Well, if they continue to do that, that's really NATO, which is America bombing Russia. And if they continue to do that, Putin won't put up with it and has already talked about using nuclear weapons. So we're on the knife edge. You know, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist said we're 90 seconds to midnight. I'd say we're 5. And it's terrifying. And, that'll be the end of everything. I wake up in the morning and I look out and think, well, the roses are still here.
Mhm.
And that's such a threat to your lovely young generation. And no one is bloody talking about it. And it really pisses me off.
It pisses me off too.
It's time to be angry, but it's time to educate.
I also wanted to ask you, a large part of what the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation does is talking directly to leaders. I just came back from a week of lobbying in Washington. When you've spoken to leaders that are so entrenched in the doctrine of deterrence, what do you, and say you have 5 minutes to get your message, what do you think cuts through that best? Is it the moral imperative? Is it the fact that
No, describe the medical effects of a bomb dropping on Washington, vaporize them. Use the information, the data of what will happen to them, how close it is, how the missiles take half an hour to go from Russia to America. And in that time, the button's pressed and they go the other way. So within an hour, we're all dead, or, millions. You teach them. They don't bloody know. And deterrence is crap. What do you mean having more nuclear weapons deters Russia making nuclear weapons? It's absolutely insane. And you need to call them on it.
Yeah, it's the prisoner's dilemma at the end.
And, as young people, it's your world. You're inheriting this world. You have an absolute right to stand up for yourselves. And the silly old men in Congress don't give an asshole that don't know their asshole from their breakfast time. That's what an Australian says.
I mean,
They're
so
ignorant.
many of them make it seem like this is, high level security, military analysis.
It's crap. It's not high level, it's high level desecration and destruction of the planet. That's what it is. Use the proper terminology. Don't use their Pentagon terminology. It's absolute rhubarb.
Mm-hmm. You've also, I saw that you recently, semi-recently, hosted a symposium on AI in relation to nuclear. Can you tell me a little bit about
sleepwalking to Armageddon? Well,
what is the most concerning with
the
AI?
physicist, what the physicist who was in a wheelchair, what was his name? Who died?
Stephen Hawking.
Brilliant man. He said about 12 years ago that putting weapons on AI, which they're doing, will lead to automatic nuclear. And I thought, oh my God. So that's why I held a symposium on it.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't do any good.
But within, I mean, there's different ways of implementing AI. I recently read that they're considering creating fully eliminating human power from this nuclear submarine, fully making them powered.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So
they're very clever, these blokes. I mean, they're all, I call it testosterone poisoning.
Yeah.
Men have always fought. And in fact, chimpanzees fight, gorillas fight. It's the testosterone imperative. But now, I mean, 52% of the world's population are women. We stand back and let the buggers do it. But it's the young people that have to get into this, and they're demonstrating in colleges about the genocide and everything. That's wonderful. But they really need to start demonstrating against the impending genocide.
Yes.
The impending nuclear genocide.
Even
and Israel has about 300 nuclear weapons. Israel. She's never confirmed nor denied, so not allowed to talk about it, but they do.
Yeah, I mean, you can even directly connect the demonstrations that were going on surrounding Gaza to this.
Of course.
It doesn't even have to be a separate movement. It can just be
Of course.
expanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I see. No, start with my webpage, watch every single video, and watch If You Love This Planet. And from that, your gut will tell you what to do. Yeah. You have the fate of the earth on your shoulders. You do, because it's the young people. This is the entree. Forget all the silly old bastards in Washington and everything. They don't know. I mean, you've got the medium that you need to save the planet. and it's the young people, and you're getting to, if you turn on these kids, like really turn them on, which the film will, you're starting to create a movement.